Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell, and today we have a special crossover episode. Zach Bartles is not joining me today, but Nathan Bartleball is. Nathan, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. Will I actually be on the show this time? Yeah. I mean, will this show be? Is this real?
It's not going to be like another Stranger Things,
right? Which, by the way, did we ever come to a conclusion whether what you guys are arguing over whether I'm a Mike or a Dustin?
Oh yeah. I forget which one we categorized you as.
Well, it sounded like Zach was reticent to peg me as Dustin. I think he was saying Mike, and you went with Dustin. I liked your thinking. If I get a say in it, I think Dustin was a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah.
Although I think there were statements made like, a little more scholarly, or always seems to kind of know the base of what's going on. And I'm pretty sure that episode ended with a clip of me saying something like, I am an 80s robot. So I don't know. I think I was quite generous there.
That was also the episode that had the single greatest line from you about, what was it, watching Screen 4, or like, yeah, I don't think I saw that one. It was like, wait a minute, I reviewed that.
Oh, it started. I believe it was. I didn't know they made a Screen 4. And
yeah.
Not only did I review it, I found that I did review it. It's still online somewhere. And apparently, I was slightly positive about it, but apparently not that positive that I remembered it. So, and in reading the review, I didn't remember anything about it either. So, which may lead into an interesting conversation later in regards to horror movies a little bit. But yeah, I'm doing great, Nathan. How about you?
Nice. Yeah, I'm doing well. School for both of us is in full swing. You have a family full of back to schoolers now. Not only
technically everybody's a student right now except me.
Yeah. You have your two children that started last week, day after Labor Day, and then your wife Jen started back up as well with her master's, correct?
Yeah. So everything is a little crazy right now, but it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
It's going well.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, and same here. Joy and I are back into the swing of things, and so off to a rolling start. Excited to see what the year has to
Summer
offer.
really seemed to melt away, didn't it?
It did.
It seems like it was just here and then gone again.
Yeah. And that's, I feel like that's interesting, because maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Summer has always been up and down for me in terms of movies and what's coming out and what's available. Sometimes you get the great summer blockbusters, and Joy and I have summers where we look at it and we're like, this isn't really a year where we're going to go see things. Other times it's like, man, it seems like there's a movie coming out every week. But I feel like now we're getting into, the fall and winter release of things where, I'm actually really looking forward to, and I talked about this a few weeks ago on, the True These Go to 11 podcast, not the crossover one that we're doing, but Zach and I
as if this is like the fake one, the tarnished one. You already have thrown it under the bus. This is it still needs to go to 11, man.
But yeah, so I'm looking forward to the Rise of the Skywalkers. Back when Zach and I were...
What's that movie about? Rise of the Skywalker?
Not Rise of the...
I've never heard about that.
Yeah.
No, I'm just teasing him. I'm pretending like somebody in the world doesn't know what a Star Wars movie is. I think that's the right time, right? Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of the Skywalker.
I think there's no S on the end.
So, that's right. Yeah, Rise of the Skywalker. So I'm actually looking forward to that. Some of the trailers I've seen are good. I have a lot of friends who are huge into Star Wars, and they're already trying to guess and all that stuff. And I feel like, trailers nowadays are just trying to misdirect you. So I'm just going to wait till it comes out and see what happens.
Maybe I can make a prediction now that will cause someone to get angry like I did the very first time you guys had me on the show, I think, or second time, I made some sort of reference about something I thought might be happening based on the Force Awakens trailer,
Right.
which was completely wrong.
Right.
But that somebody, I think like, oh, great way to spoil that. So,
right.
I have heard a couple interesting theories or thoughts about that title. That Rise of the Skywalker, there was a thought out there, might have been Kevin Smith or somebody that suggested that Skywalker maybe is referring to more like a title or a new birth of the Jedi religion, because we've had the Last Jedi, now we have the Rise of the Skywalker, and that Skywalker might be a new sort of following, if you will, a new religion in the galaxy. You kind of see some of this happening at the end of the Last Jedi. I guess spoilers for that if anyone who hasn't seen it.
Right.
Where you see them telling the story of Luke Skywalker. I mean, they were doing a little bit of this, in the other movies, but the little kids are reenacting the battles where he has the battle that occurs. I guess it's a battle. It's not really a battle, but
right.
when he sort of fakes everybody out at the end of the Last Jedi. And there are hints and movements towards that. So I wonder if the Rise of Skywalker is not necessarily the rise of the family name, but maybe something that's a little bit bigger, that if the Jedi were sort of faulty, the First Order replaced the Sith in a sense. The Sith are still underneath the First Order.
Right.
So I don't know. It could be interesting. It could be, I don't know how I feel about the fact that we're bringing the Emperor back. We have literally all the old bad stuff. It's back. So we've had Death Stars. Now the Emperor's voice or his
cackle,
that iconic laugh, and Ian McDermott is in the movie. So I don't know. At this point with Star Wars, like most of these other franchises, I just trying to walk in and see what happens, because I feel like I do much better that way. I walked into The Last Jedi, and I actually was probably I think you and I even did an episode, but I was probably more positive on that movie than a lot of people, because I just kind of walked into it with my kids and we had a good time. And there were things I liked, there were things I didn't like, but overall I appreciated it.
Yeah, no, definitely. One of the other ones that I talked about, and we will get into our topic, but one of the things that I was looking forward to was on Netflix, the Dark Crystal series. Have you had a chance to watch any of that?
So my kids and I and Jen have watched about 3-4 episodes of it, and I'm really enjoying it. I love the Jim Henson Creature Shop, and I feel like in recent years, particularly since the death of Jim Henson, they had the Witches, but after that, they didn't feel like they did anything that had quite the same passion and energy behind it, and the focus as they had when Henson was alive. I mean, he was doing a lot of kind of groundbreaking stuff, and then of course, there's only so far that you can kind of push that particular art form that he had, kind of with that Muppets and puppets perspective that he had towards special effects, and of course everything kind of went more the way of CGI. So it's really nice to see this come back and be, I think, probably one of the most impressively constructed pieces that the Henson Creature Factory's done. And so far, what I've seen, it's a much better piece of work, a much better piece of art than the original Dark Crystal, which I love the costumes and the Skeksis and the Gelflings. But even as a kid, I always felt that movie is a little cold. They don't quite get enough emotions out of the little puppets, and the story is sort of boilerplate fantasy. You got a bad thing here, and you have some good characters here, and you've got this mysterious force in the middle. But it doesn't have a lot to differentiate for it. I don't connect to it the same way I connect to like the Neverending Story or even Labyrinth a few years later, where you've got Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie, so they kind of anchor the movie. This has a much more deeper storyline running through it, and the puppet effects mixed with some CGI are getting some actual kind of performances there. And I feel like this is the thing they were trying to go for in 1982, and it's nice to see them really trying to pay off the stories and to create a textured and multifaceted world. And 3 episodes in, I feel like I'm just now starting to be able to differentiate the Gelflings. That's still a problem, to be able to tell one Gelfling from the other. But they're starting to develop their stories. Jen and I have both kind of come to the conclusion that this is Game of Thrones for children. and anyone who's seen both, you probably don't have to see both to see the connection. But I will say there's a darkness to it. And that darkness is pivoted around that PG-13 level. But because we're dealing with puppets and Muppets, I think they're getting away with a little bit more there. But so far, it's a compelling and interesting story, and I'm impressed kind of just that it exists. I'm just happy. It could have been mediocre, and I'd still be happy it's there.
Yeah.
But so far, it's really interesting.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I'm further ahead. I just finished episode.
Oh, so you have seen some of it?
Oh,
You've
yeah.
watched some of it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I thought you okay.
Yep.
I was trying to be kind of vague about everything. I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. No, I'm on either episode 6 or 7, and I can tell you, like, it seems that they really do a good job at increasing that level of performance. One of the ones that I just watched, it was either 6 or 7, and like there were moments that I'm watching it, and I was like, man, I forgot I was just watching this puppet show. That they're actually doing such a good job with bringing these characters to life that I don't feel like I'm watching, just Jim Henson and the puppets, that there's actually, like you said, there's a deeper layer going on. It does have, some darker elements to it, but those are even played off. I would say those are played off even more, reminding me, and we're going to talk a lot about nostalgia, but it reminds me of some of the darker elements that we saw through different shows and movies and things like that in the early 80s. And, as a child, you'd watch those things, and it wasn't over the top in some cases. Now, in some cases, it was over the top, but in some cases, it wasn't. The story was very well done and written that you didn't have to go into, such dark, gritty, to tell the story. And so I feel like they've done a good job at portraying those serious modes and elements within the story, and really, doing a good job with that. So, I think that is. Go ahead.
I think that is kind of the nuance and the artistry that Henson brought to his stuff is in this as well. And I think to your point, you're right. Let me back up. I was talking about it being dark. It's really no darker than the original story. I guess what's interesting is, and this is kind of where that craft comes in, if this were a live action storyline, it probably by default would be darker.
Yes.
Because if this involved human characters, this would be darker and maybe a little more troublesome. And they've pitched it at that level of fairy tale where they're able to deal with these dark elements in a way that isn't going to push families who want to watch this away.
Yes.
I think you definitely may want to watch an episode if you got super young kids. I'm showing it to my children, and they're enjoying it. But outside of that, it's still it's in that same vein. It's still a part of that legacy of what Henson was doing. I was really disappointed last year. I didn't see the movie personally, but I know that they did this movie. I think it was called The Happy Time Murders or something. It's just really raunchy. The Jim Henson, and I think Brian Henson may have even directed it. They went all out to kind of make the puppets and the Muppets raunchy, and it was sort of like, I'm not really interested in that. Like, that was not what drew me to this particular art form. Right. And so it's nice to see the Dark Crystal kind of really honed in on that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes so far, and this isn't really a spoiler because of the nature of it, there's just a scene early on at first or second episode where you're just watching one of these little characters just groom themselves in the morning, like when they wake up and they're combing their hair, and just that scene in itself, beyond all these visual creatures and things that are going on, reminded me of what I love so much about Henson and his puppets and his Muppets.
Yes. Yeah, it's the nuances, bringing these characters to life. Even, it's something that you would see in some of these great shows, like Game of Thrones, like Breaking Bad, somebody, and again, it's not that level, obviously.
No, not at all.
Intensity,
but it's on the PG.
Right.
My Game of Thrones reference is that they're weaving so many storylines, and they're not afraid to get in and have like some palace intrigue and some layers to the stories and a mythology that slowly builds. Usually in a kid's fantasy, you try to throw all the elements up front so everybody knows who the heroic characters are, who the villainous characters are, and then we're all laid out, and then the rest will just be fantasy skirmishes or escapes and rescues, and then we'll get to the end and everything will get wrapped up exactly the way you expect it to be. Yeah. That's not what's happening here.
Yeah. Yep. Now, do you know, Nathan, is this supposed to be a prequel or a sequel or
Nyquil? It's not
I
Nyquil.
know, right?
I'm just kidding. It's I believe it's a prequel. I'm not as far along as you. It does seem like these events that are happening, unless it's intended to be a sidequel, if you will, more
Right.
like a separate reimagining. I'm not sure. It does seem like this would be a prequel. There's a set of characters I've not seen. I'm not sure if they get brought in that exist in the Dark Crystal that I have not seen yet, that were a major component of the old story. And I haven't seen them yet. It does seem like there are characters that are alive here. The characters I recognize that are alive that were not alive in the Dark Crystal that are much older. So I'm pretty certain it is a prequel. I just haven't quite. I've specifically not read anything about it, and I'm just sort of taking each episode at a time. And
Nice.
I'm probably not a Dark Crystal scholar to begin with, so I don't. I'm basically going off my memories of watching the movie a few years back because my understanding or suspicion that it was a prequel, I was going to show this first and then let the kids see the other one just to get a handle on it, because I think in this case it actually may be more beneficial to the old movie to see it after this, so they get a kind of historical feel for it.
Yeah, and I think it was even longer when I saw it. I remember I watched it a lot when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite movies, but just growing up and getting into teen and adulthood years, there wasn't a whole lot of people who had an appreciation for the movie or even saw the movie, and so it has been a number of years since I've seen it. So I'm going to finish this up and then go back and watch the movie to get try.
Which conveniently Netflix has put on there as well. So
Right,
you can
right.
kind of watch it all in one place.
Yay, Netflix. Nice. Well, we are here going to be talking about it and horror movies, and we'll kind of see where the conversation goes, but we're going to start off talking about it. Many of the listeners might be, there listening to me say that and like, man, we just heard a podcast a few weeks ago where Nathan's like, he doesn't really watch horror movies, and yet he's going out and seeing it. What's up with that? I remember,
and you were up all night for watching. Pet Sematary.
from watching Pet Sematary. Yeah, I'm telling you that, like, that little girl was just absolutely freaky, and to me, it was a testimony of how good she was as an actress, being able to go from this sweet, innocent child into this, nightmarish character was just it blew my mind, and it surprised me. And I think that's probably what it was. It surprised me in such a way that it left me with this creepy feeling, like these chills when I think about her performance in that, which you actually had a different take because you weren't as impressed with the movie, correct?
And part of this is I've read the book, I saw the old movie, and I saw the new movie as well, and the not so great sequel to the old movie, like in the mid '90s. I think that had like Edward Furlong in it. Yeah, but movie aside, the overall movie aside, I agree with what you said. She probably gave the most interesting performance in the movie. I thought that the actress playing her mother also did a really great job. Mm-hmm. Those two, and they pivot off of each other, particularly towards the end. I think even more so than the Louis Creed character in this particular version, who's the father. Yeah. And what we're talking about here, I mean, it's minor spoilers for Pet Sematary, but we're talking about a kind of child returned from the dead and not returned in the fashion that they thought the child would be returned in.
Right.
And I think that the creepiness that you kind of felt there were testament to two things. One, her performance, and it's historically been a case that is really hard. It seems, I think everyone wants to play the villain and wants to play the monster or the creature, and we can think of lots of examples of where it's been done great. I mean, we'll probably talk about a couple here in a minute directly tied to it. But I think it's notoriously hard, actually, to get a good performance when you're playing something that has a lot of other elements to it, like when you're under the makeup and you're under the effects. I think it's harder, not easier, to get lost in that. So it's actually kind of a minor miracle, I think, when we have a character that can, particularly a young character, the little boy who played Gage, Miko, I think it was Miko Williams in the original movie. It was a little silly and a little weird. He was also very, very young, and it was kind of weird and unsettling to see him in that role. She's relatively young as well, but it's just her performance mixed with, I think, the underlying plot, the underlying themes that Stephen King was shooting for in the original novel is what comes through. And I think that's why we're still making movies based off of his books, and why we still see these things being trotted out. Underneath, I think he really has the ability to hit the currents of what's disturbing or what's unsettling to us. And he had once stated that with Pet Sematary, he started with the very basic thing of the death of a child, and the finality of that event in a life is really about all the horror you need at the baseline for a story like that. And I think that speaks to why that still works, even if the movie is, so-so. You've got this strong idea and some strong performances in there.
Yeah. But so I had not, we come up to, I don't know, what was it, about 2 weeks ago, and you had texted me and you were like, hey, we're going out with Greg. I'm going out with Greg and his boys to see the movie, the second chapter of it. Would you be interested? And I love your comment because you prefaced it right away. It's more like a Stranger Things horror type thing, not Pet Sematary. And I was
because I just heard you tell the podcast, and that was my hook. I asked Greg first, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to check with Nathan, and should I lead with don't wuss out because the 13-year-old's coming?
Right.
in jest, of course, but
that's hysterical. So yeah, I was like, you know what, I'll give it a shot, but I've got to get caught up on chapter 1 because I haven't seen that yet. And actually, I was intending to see that one. I just had not gotten around to it. And you're like, well, I've got it. Why don't you come over and we'll watch it before it comes out? So I ended up going over to your house over Labor Day weekend, and we sat down and watched it with our own running commentary in the background. And I enjoyed it. I really did. I thought it was, really well done. I liked it. I was trying to remember, based on the first movie that came out, things that went on. And you and I had talked about that. It had been such a long time since I had seen that. I remember seeing it when it first aired on television, and then a couple times after that. But it had been such a long time, and so we were kind of going back and forth with that. And I remember finishing the movie, and being like, you know what, that was it was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. It had that 80s nostalgia feel, like Stranger Things does, and like so many of those 80s movies did. The sense of adventure, the coming of age story, just all these elements were put into that movie, and I really thought it was very well done and enjoyed it. What were your thoughts on it, Nathan?
Well, and before we go there, let me ask you a question, because we talked briefly, but the movie had finished up. Both of these are very long movies.
Yes, yeah.
And it's funny because even though we saw them together, and we saw the other one with Greg and his boys, we didn't really get a lot of time to talk about them, because at that point of the evening, you're sort of like, right. I don't think when we watched the one here at the house, we watched here in the projector, I don't think we started until like 9 o'clock or something. And so it was like, by the time we were done, it was like, yep, see you later in the week. And it was about the same thing when we were all leaving. We had about 5 or 10 minutes. So, but my question to you is, as a horror film, how did you feel about it as a horror movie? Was it, did it play for you the same way Pet Sematary played, or was it different? Because I have a kind of feeling about why this movie's been so successful. I was curious to hear your thoughts as someone who's not a huge fan of the genre.
Yeah.
Did you feel it was too intense, or?
No, I really didn't. I don't know. And honestly, I don't know that I could sit there and pinpoint specifically why there are certain movies, like what is it about certain movies that disturbs me more than others? You know, what is that reaction? But it didn't have the same feel to it. It was different. I think part of it was these kids are actively fighting against the evil, and they're coming together and they're overcoming it. Where Pet Sematary just seemed like it was there was attempts at fighting, but evil basically won out in that movie. And so I don't know if that was part of it, but I really can't nail down specifically. But it did to me have such a different feel to it than Pet Sematary did. There was a sense of hope and a sense of victory that came from this, and I think, even if Pet Sematary had ended with, these people being wiped out, these undead people being wiped out, that it still wouldn't have had the same feel as this, because all still would have been lost. And in this, there wasn't that sense of all was lost, even though there are some tragedies and casualties that come about in this movie, and so I think that's the best that I can do to kind of narrow that down. But there was to me a very distinct difference in. I wouldn't have necessarily considered this a horror movie as such, and I guess part of that is just my reaction to the movie. It wasn't scary in that way.
No, that's good. I think that is, I think what you were saying kind of backs up what I've heard from a lot of people, and the feeling that this is, in a way, a horror movie for people who don't normally enjoy horror movies. Mm-hmm. And it's funny to think of Stephen King this way because he's so tied to horror. I think of King really more as almost like a whether you think he's a super great writer or not, I think he is very much in the vein of like a modern day Dickens.
Yeah.
Just in the kind of work that he does and his humanist bent and the stories and the characters that he brings to life. He kind of he does tend to write in a particular genre, and particularly these two, It and Pet Sematary, were written at a point where that was pretty much all he was doing and all he was really known for. Mm-hmm. But he has the ability to evoke a lot of different human emotions, and the storyline in the It, particularly the first movie we're talking about, where we're dealing with these young kids going against this force of evil in their town and sort of having to come together. You're right, it has like an empowerment vibe to the overall arc of the story. You're dealing with people who are helpless in a sense. These kids are maybe even more helpless than the adults because no one wants to listen to them, or at least that's the way it seems. Right. And they're able to band together and become stronger than that. And I think that's what sort of sets it apart. So all the horror elements that are there are easier, go down a little easier. I remember I was very young when I saw the movie Aliens, and I'm not recommending anybody show someone the movie Aliens at a super young age, but I remember being sort of like initially freaked out a little bit, but so much more invigorated by that movie than and not as freaked out by it as maybe even some PG-13 horror movies I'd seen, primarily because of what you talked about, the tone. The tone of Aliens versus, say, the tone of Alien is dark and it's moody, but it's also there's an empowerment to it. You have the survivor of the previous film coming in with the Marines, and the Marines are sort of having to rely upon her, and you're watching someone go from a place of helplessness to hopefulness and resistance against evil. I think that's, to me, one of the things that works in horror movies. I think we were talking a long time ago, and you were saying, well, I'm not really a fan of horror movies. I feel like, I think I have enough fighting skills that I can take out like a killer or something, which is an interesting, which to me always felt like a super reduction of a very specific kind of horror movie. But I think to me, the horror movies that are very jarring or jolting are the ones that deal with the concept of helplessness. The thing about Pet Sematary is that helplessness of it doesn't really matter what ability or skill or wealth that I have. He can't get to the road in time to stop the truck and his child. And it's just, everything else spirals from there, and everything is in the face of hopelessness and helplessness. And King captures it so well, but I'm like, I just as soon wish you hadn't.
Right.
It's a feeling where I walk away from a movie like that and a book like that, and I just feel kind of almost just downtrodden. You're sort of like, you don't want to really talk to anyone. You just feel kind of moody, and you just want to kind of just be alone.
Right.
And I don't think that was the case with it. I like the movie for a lot of the same reasons you did. I have enjoyed the book. I thought that they did a nice job of distilling. The book is so huge and so sprawling, and it covers so much ground that deciding to take the younger segments of it and break it off was probably smart. I feel like the miniseries, which I think starred like Jonathan Brandis, was my primary child actor. Seth Green was also in it.
Yeah,
I think Seth Green was young Richie Tozier in that one, who's kind of the young, comedic class clown kind of kid who's a part of their group. And those were the strongest elements I remember of that segment. Of course, this story involves a monster that is snatching up the children of the town of Derry, and it primarily manifests itself, most everyone probably already knows this, as a clown. It's not the only form that it takes, but it's the primary form that it uses to, on one hand, draw unsuspecting people in, and on the other hand, it uses it to sort of torment these kids who have all become sort of simultaneously aware of it. And the performances were really good, particularly the kids. Finn Wolfhard, who was in Stranger Things, was given a really. I actually probably in a lot of ways kind of like his take on Richie a little bit better than Mike. Like, it was fun to see him in Stranger Things, and but I think I was more impressed with him coming out of seeing it. He's the one who gets a lot of the foul language and things like that. And it's easy, I think, to see that performance is maybe a little bit just irritating, But I think that's kind of his point. Like I feel like if we hung out with a group of kids that was made up of a lot of different segments of people at any time in our life, we probably had a kid like that.
Right.
Particularly in the 80s, there was always, if you're a bunch of latchkey kids, that kid is always there. Like, he's just turned around and he's sitting at the dining room table, or he's sitting out on your stoop, and you never know where he's going to be next. And he's always the one that, when they leave, your parents say, and they have no idea why you guys hang around with him.
Right. He's the bad influence in your life. I agree. I thought the performances were great as well. There was I didn't feel like in this movie there were any wasted moments. I felt like everything was done very purposefully and directly, and you got to really see these characters develop and how and why they came together in this purpose and in this mission. I don't think it's giving anything away. The initial kind of bond with them is, Georgie has disappeared, and that's kind of the initial bond, but they're also coming together and really being thrust into this adventure for other reasons. And I thought it was very well done how those reasons were brought in. And I thought it was interesting in again, there's such a great sense of nostalgia, but not in kind of a throwaway, we're just going to token this thing, but in really purposefully driven and directed. Again, very much I think the same way the Duffer Brothers have done Stranger Things. It's just very intentional, and it's things that you remember from the time and personalities that you remember, and these adventures. Of course, I never had an adventure where I was going after a killer clown, but like I remember the adventures I had with my friends, and this just has that feel to it within this story.
Stand By Me, which is also based off a King novella, actually. This has a lot in common with that. And I think the common thread, particularly with King, is, and he's been doing this for pretty much his whole career, and you could say he's probably rung the stone one too many times for that as well. But his nostalgia is not based off of nostalgia for a specific time period. We get a lot of nostalgia movies these days, which is very, hey, remember the 80s, or hey, remember this. And what it's really trying to say, whether you're making something I mean, even Wolfhard last year was in a movie called Mid-90s, you know? So it's like as we get older, we realize there's new decades for people to be nostalgic about. But the nostalgia really comes from one thing. I mean, not one thing. I don't think there's a ton of people that were probably in their 30s or 40s during the 80s. Maybe there are who are like, yeah, the 80s, you know? It's about the nostalgia of the time was when you were growing up, when you were transitioning through your childhood. And that feeling, King, it's interesting because the original novel came out in 86, so the modern day components when this losers club comes back together as adults occurred in the 1950s. The children's segment did, and the 80s was the modern day at that point, you know. So but it's funny, and it's probably helpful because you have this New England town of Derry, which is already a little kind of behind the times and corrupted by the force that is living there in the town in the form of this monster, this demon, or this force, whatever it is. And that makes it so that it's easy to kind of transition. It's funny that when they transition Derry from being a place in the 1950s to a place in the 1980s, not a whole lot changes for these kids in terms of the storyline. Right, you know, it's interesting. Right. We've got different movies on that marquee. They play arcade games now, you know, is where they were down at the malt shop, you know, in the 50s version. But if you notice, a lot of the undertones of the racism that Mike Hanlon experiences is still there in the town of Derry. A lot of the same kind of mindsets and things are going on. So what King's tapping into is kind of the nostalgia of what it was to be a child and see everything in a different light, where there was magic in a bicycle, there was magic in a slingshot and things like that. I do think that the newer movie loses a little of that in comparison to both the novel and the miniseries, that wasn't as afraid to embrace those totems of childhood. Now, we get a lot of that in the newer movie, but I didn't think it was done with the same grace, if you will. How about the clown?
Yeah.
You got to talk about the clown.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm trying to remember back to Curry, and I do remember him just having more of a presence. To me, you know, this interpretation of Pennywise is almost laughable in some cases, and I think you know, there are definitely moments
the Curry performance. You mean?
What's that?
This is the Curry's performance. Tim Curry, right?
No, I thought Curry's performance was a little more eerie.
You think his was less? And I'm not saying I disagree, but you're saying his was less laughable. You thought Bill Skarsgård's was more like
laughable.
Silly?
Yeah, in some cases, and there were definitely moments where you could tell that was the intended effect. You know, a little bit of a spoiler, you know, but not really because it's in the commercial. You know, you have this old, you know, naked lady kind of running around an apartment, you know. And
at this point we should probably point out, I guess are we talking more about It Chapter 2 now as opposed to Chapter 1, or just the whole thing in general?
Well, I was just talking about Pennywise in general. Just the things that you know, the things that he does that makes him a little more I guess silly, for, you know, lack of a better word, where I felt Curry was like creepy, you know, like, you know, just ooh. But yeah, I felt like Bill Skarsgård was just the way he played Pennywise was, to me, not as horrifying as Tim Curry. What were your thoughts on their performances?
Do you get the feeling with Skarsgård, from your perspective, that you, in a sense, you're seeing very little of Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise, and that it's largely ladled on with special effects? Meaning Pennywise doesn't have as much screen time as you might imagine. That's probably true of both miniseries, and it's easy, or both. It feels like a miniseries. There's more runtime now to It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 than there was to the miniseries they did in the 90s. But the common thread there with the performances is, you're going to have special effects to augment this. And Yeah, the special effects in the old movie were very cheesy. Strangely, some of the special effects in the new movie, particularly the new chapter, I thought were actually kind of cheesy too, and not some of them weren't particularly good. If I'm going to be honest, I think that the effects work was actually a little stronger, although they had a much bigger budget. I think they were a little more reserved in the first movie, and honestly, to me, Skarsgård came to the foreground a little bit more. What he was doing, and he's a very different kind of clown. He looks like almost more like a medieval sort of court jester sort of clown. He's got the face makeup and everything, and Curry looks like a drunken clown that blew out of a circus or out of some kid's birthday party, and he's now like nursing his hangover down the sewer grate. He was Bozo the clown. He was Clarabelle. He was Ronald McDonald. He was coming from that vein of clown. And there's nothing wrong with either choice. I liked what Skarsgård was doing, where he plays it more menacing, and the monster is more prominent in the Skarsgård clown, like constantly. He's always there. And that's menacing, but it's also, I know what you mean about eerie, because I always thought of, initially reading it, I always got the feeling of the Pennywise character is almost like the lure of a deep sea anglerfish. Mm-hmm. It's out there. It's the tip of the iceberg of what this thing actually is, but it's the part that we put out there to lure people in. Right. And I can't imagine anyone being coaxed in by the Pennywise that Skarsgård is playing. I mean, it's a grab bag with Curry, but he has that thing where he's like a clown that a kid could maybe relate to a little bit, and he's playing it big and colorful. And Skarsgård's seems like he never loses sight of the fact that he's a monster in a monster movie.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, and I think that is kind of the difference. Is there are moments where you're looking at this and the person's being, drawn to this clown, and you're just kind of scratching your head like, wait a minute. No, there's no way. But I think part of that, and you and I talked about this with some of the other elements of the movie, there's something else that is drawing them to this presence. There's something else that keeps pulling them in, and it's not just the clown. So yeah, I can definitely see what you're talking about there.
There's an interesting comment that Curry had made back when he was working on the film too, about his approach to this, because in relation to the makeup and like honestly, Curry's makeup, when you get into beyond the actual clown makeup, the actual monster effects, I mean, there are no great shakes. At one point, he looks like he has molded starburst for sharp teeth, but he had, when they were getting ready to plan out the makeup and what he would look like, they were going with something much more monstrous, which is sort of what's in the book. And Curry had just recently, this movie was made in 90. He'd come off a couple of different movies, one of them being Ridley Scott's Legend. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yep.
Big fantasy movie.
Yep. Tom Cruise and who else? Who was the girl?
Mia Sara. Yep. Mia Sara was in it. And it was, but Tim Curry plays this darkness, which is this giant, almost the classical devil look, except he's got these big 6-pack abs. He's like 8 feet tall. He has full blown goat hooves and these giant like horns that each one looks like they weigh 60 pounds. Where is Curry inside of that thing? Like, I don't even know. The only part of Curry I even recognize is the lips. You know what I mean? Like, the face, like, and the voice. Like, I don't know. Hey, that had to be a heavy makeup lift. Like, I don't know. Is it makeup? Is he just in that suit? Is he piloting that like Ripley?
I know, right?
Like, I mean, it just, there's so much on him. And Curry's not a tall dude. So you're looking at this thing and you're like, I must have seen that movie several times as a kid, and then I slowly was like, wait, that's Tim Curry is in there? And I think the experience of that movie, coupled with a few others, made him make the decision, I don't want to be under all this makeup. Mm-hmm. I don't think I can perform, give you what you want under all of this. Yeah. You make me up like a clown, and I'll do the rest for you, but I don't want all this. And I think that's what makes it more haunting, like you said, is there's moments when he's being cheerful and goofy, and what would come off as asinine in another movie is a little unsettling because no one else can see this clown.
Right.
And it's haunting them, and it's messing with them, and it's saying crazy, goofy things a clown on a kid show would say, but it's doing it in a totally inappropriate setting, in an inappropriate way, in a way that you've got blood and these creepy images and the monsters around, and it just somehow, to me, that's more worrisome than the full-blown look how hideous I am kind of.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like the creepy is always more off-putting than the full-blown monster, the monster vibe that you get. I mean, and you and I talked about that a little bit as we were watching the first movie, and we talked a little bit about it too after we saw the chapter 2. It's always this thing where, like, wasn't the 80s the whole thing about not talking to strangers and stay away from strangers and all that stuff? And it's like, here you have these kids walking up to this, obviously, deranged monster clown and, getting close enough to it that it can get it. It can get at them. And so I think that was part of, to me, what played into some of the silliness that was in these two movies versus the first one, the miniseries. And again, from what I can remember of the miniseries.
It's plenty silly when you rewatch the miniseries.
Right.
That's the benefit of having something that came out so long ago and you haven't revisited. It's like it's getting the better shake.
Yeah.
and I definitely think, as far as scary tone goes, there's a better scary tone in the new films. Mm-hmm. I just think that ultimately, I don't know. I think I might, and I didn't quite feel this way until seeing both of them, but I do think I kind of prefer. I'm more on the Curry wavelength, I think, than the Skarsgård wavelength as far as the clown is concerned.
Sure. Yep. Let's talk about the style the two movies were done in, because the first one, as I'm remembering back, it was kind of shot simultaneously, right? Where they were adults remembering back to where they were kids.
Which is true of the novel too. So yeah, it's one book. It's a huge book. It's bigger than some trilogies probably put together. But you could probably take all of Lewis's Narnia and it still have a couple extra pages in King's book. But the gist of it was, yes, they're making a mini series out of this novel. And so the job from the very beginning in 1990 was we're going to carve out of this giant book a miniseries that we can put on TV. And given some of the weird things that King has included, and I think you can even go back to the podcast that Greg did a couple of years back about Stephen King, and they addressed some of the really crazy things that are in this book. It does go some wild places and some inappropriate for television and inappropriate for anybody places. Right. But most of those things have been cut out, not just of the 90s version, but this version. So they were always carving out a full story. They're going to tell the beginning, the middle, and the end. What's interesting about this is, I think, in getting the funding for this to be able to do the version that came out in 2000 and I guess 17 now, was the fact that they were pitching it, hey, we're going to do the kid's story. Because, again, you're coming off of Stranger Things, you're coming off of some of the stuff. It's going to be kind of an easy sell to people. Stephen King kind of coming back into prominence. And so they make this movie, but I don't think that they had secured funding. They had not secured funding or a guarantee that they were going to make a second one. Mm-hmm. It was always Machete's intention to make it, but it wasn't done that way. So when the movie is done, the adult losers have not been cast. And they were making it, I think, with the hopes that we will have, at the very least, if we get nothing else, we'll have this really good version of that story, that part of the story that connected so well with everyone, which is the story of the kids fighting the monster.
Yeah.
And I think they did, for the most part, knock that out of the park. I really do think that's a good movie. And I agree with you a little bit that it's hard in some ways for me to view it as a horror movie exclusively. But I think it works in all the best ways. The characters work, the clown works, and the monster stuff works. Some of the special effects are a little bit overkill, but I think it all worked. Some of what doesn't work as well for me when we get to chapter 2, I think, is down to what you said, is the style, the intention. I think they went a little bit go for broke when they made the 2017 movie, meaning that don't think everyone was 100% sure they were going to make the sequel. So they took almost everything they liked and everything they wanted to say about these characters and put it into that movie.
Yeah.
And so let's move to part 2, I guess. And do you want to keep it spoiler free, Nathan, or how do you want to approach this?
We can do our best with that. I think if anything that we mention from the trailers will be okay. But yeah, we'll try to keep all the other stuff spoiler free with it, and then we'll try to give a warning if we do a little bit at the end. So. Go ahead and talk about that, Nathan. Kind of continue on some of the things that you thought were lacking in It Chapter 2.
Yeah, and I guess this is where we can give our let's see if we can do this, the one-line movie review. If you could only do one line, well, we'll do more than this, but in terms of our thoughts on the movie, if you could do one line that if you had to lay a blurb out there and you couldn't say anything else about it, what would you say about it? It Chapter 2.
Yeah.
I think I have mine, which is that it was very flawed.
Yeah.
It was very long, but it was also very entertaining.
Yeah. Yep. So what I will say is, and I said this to you at the theater, the story that they told in It Chapter 2, I felt like they could have told in either a shorter amount of time, and you brought this point up, this second point, that the story that they told, they actually should have just gone longer with it and told more. So if that makes any sense, I feel like the story that we got from It Chapter 2, the movie is over 3 hours long. Not by much, but it is over. I
think it's under 3 hours, but it's not under by much. It's right on the line. It's about the same length. It ain't far off from Avengers Endgame, and that's not even a joke. And in some ways, it almost plays like Avengers Endgame.
Yeah. And so I felt like the story that we got on screen could have been told to us, and we really wouldn't have been missing much in a shorter amount of time. But on the same token, what you said, and I agree with it, Nathan, is that if they had actually told us this story and made it longer, it might have been a better story. And so that's kind of my thoughts on it, is I would have been interested. And I am kind of interested because from what I understand, they're going to be releasing a version of particularly It Chapter 2 that has a lot more content in it, a director's edition or a director's cut, so to speak. And so I'm kind of fascinated to see what they do with that. But I agree, it was wildly entertaining, but not nearly as good as the first one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was always going to be a heavy lift, a difficult thing to do because of the fact that there's a lot of, to be perfectly honest, as a fan of King and as a fan of the novel It, there's a lot of things wrong with what is sort of the second half of this. And it's compounded by the fact that they pulled a lot of the juice out to make the other movie, although I'm happy that they did. And one of the things I was impressed by or was appreciated is that the structure of the second half is still very much like the structure of the old miniseries and of the novel, where they do give us enough flashbacks and enough intercut, because now this is 27 years later. Yep. This creature has returned and it's out of its dormant stage, but most of these characters don't remember what happened to them 27 years ago. It's been 2 years for us watching the movie, but these characters don't. And so it's weird because King uses that for a different method, again, to replay the helplessness now as an adult.
Yep.
And then now they're facing this helplessness in a new way because they don't even have those reserves of sort of magical innocence that they had as kids, where they felt they could go up against a clown with an inhaler and a slingshot. They are far more ill-equipped in some ways to handle it now than they were originally, and that's sort of just the gist of all the stories. What happens here, though, is when those were playing simultaneously, there was a greater deal of suspense. We were learning how they defeated it as children alongside what they were doing as adults, and that creates the story as a whole piece. And here, it really feels like you're rehashing it. They kind of go through all the same motions that they did because of the need to sort of make the 2017 movie a standalone. Some of those kids conquer some of their fears and the struggles they were having that were outside of the clown in the first movie, when in fact they don't really fully make peace with those demons until they're adults. And so now we're watching them having forgotten what they did the first time and doing it again, and it just simply isn't as interesting on that level. I liked some of the Pennywise. I actually thought some of the Pennywise stuff was a little bit scarier in this movie, some of it, particularly stuff involving the kids. Although my caveat with that is I'm not sure if I liked when we started to put the kids into danger. There's a couple of scenes. There's one scene that works almost as well as anything Curry did. Takes place under the bleachers at a football game, which is horribly creepy, I thought, and was to me the most probably potentially disturbing thing in the movie that worked in the way it was supposed to be disturbing. It pushed the line, but it did have me sort of being like, okay, I thought that was when the clown, I think it was creepiest. It's also probably the point where he is playing the anglerfish, like we talked about. Like, it's the moment where he's most trying to be the deceiver. And there's another point where we see him where it's a scarred and really just the white clown makeup, kind of like, and you get a hint of what that performance could have been like. And I like that too. Yep. There's a moment he makes himself visible to one of the kids, and he's just got the white pancake makeup on. And I was like, I'd be interested in seeing that performance done a little bit more like that. So those scenes were good. The casting is amazing. Yes. I mean, I thought the casting was great. Strangely to me, the one who came out about the weakest was James McAvoy. He's still good. I don't know if it's because I've seen McAvoy in so much stuff, but I think that I was expecting maybe something a little stronger there. Mm-hmm. He's fine. Maybe it's also that it seems like they don't quite know what to do with Bill Denbrough in this version. They've taken so many pieces that belong to him and sort of divvied them up among the other characters that I had a hard time getting a good handle on him. They give him a side story that's different than the book, and I thought it was going one direction, and I wasn't really happy where that went. The side plot involving a kid who lives in the house he grew up in. Yeah. And I thought they really mismanaged that in such a way that it was constantly distracting me from his storyline. Yeah. Who did you think the best of the new cast was? You have to pick your top three.
Top three, I think Bill Hader did a phenomenal job in this.
Oh, he was by far the standout. Yeah.
I think his job and what he did, his performance was just mind blowing. I think he did a great job with that.
We're going to see that again at Oscars, I'm pretty certain. A nomination at least. I think he's got a nomination in it.
Yeah, I thought his job was just phenomenal. I mean, the role that he took on in bringing his that childhood persona and placing that on him as an adult, and even the things that he works through as an adult, the quote unquote demons that he has to face, both literal and figurative, that he has to face, I think are the most interesting, and I think they do the best job with developing his character in this. The second person that I thought was great was what was the name of the kid who was the chubby one?
Ben.
Yes, Ben. And I enjoyed that actor. I don't know if you ever saw the show Beauty and the Beast that came out with Kristen Crook several years ago.
I did see a little bit of it, yes.
So he was in that, and I enjoyed his performance in that. I thought he did a really good job with that show. So I really enjoyed him in this as well.
One of the things I liked about that particular casting is that's the character that, it's the classic ugly duckling becomes a swan kind of deal. Not that that little boy's ugly, but he's a little in a very, very he was a very appealing actor in the original in the 2017 version, the little boy.
Yes.
But he's very heavy set. He's very heavy, overweight. But his smile, he's at this really great infectious smile. What I thought was neat was they did such a nice job of matching up these characters so that they actually did look like they could have grown into these people.
Yes.
And the thing is, now you've got the hunk that the fat kid used to be, and that never works. Like, you never look at that, think, oh yeah, you were that kid. But he's got the same laugh lines as the little boy, and you can look in his face and see, I can see how you came from that. And to me, that bridge did as much as any of the acting between the two to really make you feel like, oh yeah, this is the same guy. The guy who was the actor playing Eddie Kasparek was like that kid grown up.
That was
I mean, that was just that was so perfect. The job that he did there was so great. I thought the acting of Eddie's character in the miniseries was very strong too. But it was good. It was good here. I agree what you said about Hader, and he gives it just a strong performance. It's not because it's one thing to play the goofy guy or the sarcastic guy. It's another thing to play the guy that lets you see the pain that makes him the sarcastic. Goofy guy. There's a moment in this movie, and there's a lot of really strong moments. I just felt that there was too much. The movie's overstuffed. I've never watched. It's not true. I've watched many of them, but it's always a weird experience for me when I watch a 2.5 hour or longer movie and feel like I got no real handle on the characters overall. Like, you want a more character development. Like these, except for Hader's character, you don't really get much growth for them because they're all sort of spinning out. I think because we left so much of Richie's story to be discovered, he's the only one who isn't just recycling the things that already happened to him. But there's a moment of like grief in this movie, performance of someone grieving that to me was like very, I mean, it positively speaking to what the movie did, uncomfortable to watch. Like, it was almost as uncomfortable as watching an actual person grieve in front of you over, a fresh loss. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what scene I'm talking about? Like, I watched that and I felt very moved by it, like unexpectedly so. Yes. Because it was not long after I just watched, like, just all heck break loose special effects wise. And then there's this moment, and I was just like blown away by that moment more than anything else, I think, in the movie. And I just thought I wanted so much more of that. The Mike Hanlon character gets really shortchanged here. The actor's doing an excellent job, and I want to see much more of Mike, what he did when he stayed in the town. I could watch Mike Hanlon, the miniseries about him just investigating the IT stuff, and probably enjoy it more than maybe all of this histrionics that we get with the special effects and all that.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that's an excellent point. I really wanted so much more of Mike in this movie, and I mean, that guy's just got a great cadence and tempo to his deliverance of everything as well. I mean, you could sit there and listen to that guy speak all the time, and
it was such a short change. They didn't give him his due really at all, I didn't think. Yeah. Chastain was great. I wanted to see more of her. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what about what did you think of how they handled Stan?
I was going to bring that up because this is a part where I'm going to do my best. I guess we can put a little mild spoiler warning here because I'm going to try not to spoil it, but I'd talk around it. Every fiction, every story, most of the really good stories, it's funny, you think back to things, we think of Lord of the Rings, we think of all these stories, and we have characters coming together, and no one remembers that there were more than 2 hobbits that left, or more than 4 hobbits that left the Shire, right?
Right.
Or like, there was a 5th one, no one knows about him because he stayed next to the tree.
Right.
You wouldn't go any further, and you didn't get to have all those adventures and all those breakfasts. But in this story, too, when the losers are going to come back, Stanley's not present, and there's a reason why. There's a reason. The reason is the same in all 3 iterations. It's fleshed out much more in the book, and it does deal with some of Stanley's specific dealings with it when he was a kid. And the gist too is that, like we said, not all of them remember, and it seems like that maybe Stanley does. I didn't really feel this way. I knew they were kind of toying with things when I saw the movie the night we watched it, but it wasn't until afterwards that something about that left me a little uneasy with the way they handle Stanley. They want the movie wants to really make him have a presence in here, but like the others, they don't give him enough character development to really see who he had become.
Yes,
and there's a reason for why we don't get a lot of that, but they do something that feels a little. It's weird. It's weird because of what it actually says. Like there's a moment meant to be in an emotional thing, and it reminded me a lot. These after the fact letters like we get in stuff like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
There's an after the fact letter that seems like a really nice coda to something, but when you think about what it's saying,
right?
When you think about the message it's sending, I'm a little bit concerned by it. I mean, I in a movie with giant monster clowns, I guess it sounds weird to be concerned about anything, but that's a weird message. Like if you hear the message that he's saying and you take it for what's being said, I think that could be hurtful. Actually,
Sure.
People may not know what I'm talking about, but it's the message it's sending in the story is not, I think, the same one that could be taken by someone who's watching this and contemplating the things that Stanley contemplates in this movie.
Yeah.
That I don't know if you felt that way. If I went too serious in that moment of watching it, if I, should have been.
Yeah, no, actually, that's exactly what came to my mind, as well as some other, in light of some more popular shows that have come out more recently. That's exactly what came to my mind, what you were talking about. And I just feel like, we talked about Stranger Things, and so I'll use the spoiler of Stranger Things, that after letter we get, from Hopper is just so heart-wrenching, and so emotional. But I think it's because the way the letter has to be given and handled in that situation is just very different than I think this has to be done.
That's a case of you're taking a letter intended for something else and you're giving it a level of different context. The script writing just it's always intended to be at the end, but the character doesn't intend to. The character writes it with no idea of what is happening to him later.
Right.
It's the irony of it that makes it poignant.
Right.
The screenwriters always know, but the characters don't know. And this is a little bit different. But it wasn't even the way it functioned in the story. It was just when you think about what Stanley's saying,
right,
and the nature of this potential heroic thing. It's like I wouldn't want anyone to hear that and think, oh yeah,
that's
what? That makes sense. That makes sense. As an astonishing lack of self-care in that sentiment, I think, that's being played. But I think if you like Stephen King, if you liked it, you're going to probably like this one. I would be surprised, though, to see if anyone who really felt it was a lot stronger than the other one. King put so much unimaginably weird stuff into that last part of the book that it would have been hard to make that happen. I do like that they went pretty big. Like we do get some big bombastic stuff. Yeah. And I know I probably always sound like I hate special effects stuff. I actually love things when it's done right. I love it. And I do think that the big confrontation at the end with it has a kind of epic feel that I wanted to see. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to say, I think that they stick the landing on the ending, the actual ending, leading up to the confrontation and everything that flows from the confrontation. It's better than the book. I think that they make it more emotional in the book. The tones that they're hitting there in that very end, I think, are pretty strong. How did you feel about it? I mean, with all the special effects, that's the moment when I thought everything was sort of synergized and working together. The acting, the horror. There was a couple silly moments that were sort of pinging me out of it. There was like almost Scooby-Doo like scene there, like with the 3 doors, and I was like, "Whoa, what's happening here?"
Right.
But so much of that was really firing on all the cylinders. It's like I've often said, like sometimes a movie is so good it makes you think about how it could have been so much better.
Yeah, and to your point, like there's. So I have not read the book, full disclaimer on that. I've not read the book, but I know enough about it from people who have read it that I feel like, some of those trippier moments where you're looking at it going, how is that going to possibly translate on the big screen? I felt like those things were handled very well. The process that they go through to figure out how they're going to defeat this creature, I thought, you know what? That's actually kind of neat the way they did it, and I felt like it played into as much of a realistic setting as you could have in this case, in this type of a movie, without being weird and over the top. And so, yeah, I did enjoy the ending and the way everything kind of came together and played up. I did enjoy that scene that you were talking about with the three doors, because it was like it went back to the first movie where they encountered this, and it's like, but it
wasn't so much the doors; it was what was behind the doors.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it in and of itself. It was a weird. It was a weird departure for in the middle of what
was going on. Yeah,
epic throwdown. Yeah.
No, I would agree with that, but and I think that's part of what made this movie a little not as good as the first one, because in the first one, again, I don't feel like there were throwaway moments. I think everything was played up and done very well and very intentionally. And you and I have already talked about that. Like, they went big, go big or go home, and they went big and they did a good job. This one, I felt like there were more of those throwaway moments in there that just were out of place and out of sync for the story. But you're right. The ending was done very well. It was big. The special effects were great. The confrontation of what they were really facing, what they were really going to have to do in order to defeat it, and trying to figure out, how are we going to do this, and getting in and working together and bringing it all to a close. I thought it was very well done, especially in light of the fact that particularly in this one, King is not necessarily known for his great endings. That's kind of a recurring theme. And you're right. I feel like this movie did a good job at bringing the ending justice.
Yeah, I think so. Just very, very quick things I wanted to mention in terms of the movie. It was interesting. I thought they did a nice job. There's a scene that most people who've read the book will recognize, which is really the opening. It's one of the opening scenes of the book in terms of like what reveals to us the horror of Pennywise. Is the scene involving takes place at the carnival at the fair.
Yep. And
there's an act of violence there, which is far more disturbing, really, than Pennywise or anything else that goes on in the movie. And it really, I think, the kind of darkness there that shows what's kind of under the heart of Derry and how it's symbiotic with Pennywise itself. I wanted to see a little bit more of that, not those kinds of actions, but that level of horror and that level of distaste that's in those scenes. It makes you feel uneasy, and I think that the movie could have used a little bit more of that to punch it up a little bit. I did like the original book. When King says one of the reasons he was writing it was thinking of all the monsters that scared him as a kid. The iconic things, the Wolfman and Dracula and Frankenstein's monster, and how do you get all those things into a movie like without just being like Abbott and Costello, right? Like they all show up. Like how do all these guys get here? And so the idea of having a thing that can be whatever you are most fixated on or afraid of in the moment. And so there was a parade of those 50s monsters. And of course, I think a lot of people thought, hey, when the 80s come around, we're going to have Freddy and Jason and all these things. And no, they didn't do that. They didn't go that way. It was probably better that they didn't. And yet here in this movie, no, we don't get Freddy or Jason. But there is an iconic 80s monster that shows up. And it's like perfectly homaged because it also ties into like what's going on kind of with it. I thought that was kind of smart and brilliant. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The moment, when it happened, I instantly knew like what movie I was looking at, and it's not the one I think people would think you would pick, but it was an iconic 80s monster. So yeah, I liked that. I thought very weird use of "Just Call Me Angel" in this movie. So weird, and so quick, and so quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
But but oh my gosh, Sophie Lillis, I think, was one of the standouts in the original, who played young Beverly, and she's good here again. I realize I don't think we mentioned her, but she was probably, to me, the big standout of the first movie in terms of like, wow, you kind of knocked it out of the park, what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think Bill Hader was that force in this movie. So yeah, it's I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to Dr. Sleep, which is coming out soon, directed by Mike Flanagan, which is the sequel to The Shining.
Yep.
It's interesting that they're making so many references to the Kubrick Shining because King hates that version.
Right.
And this is very specifically based off a book he did write. So I'm interested to see what that segue looks like. That doesn't mean that I happen to love the Kubrick Shining. I'm curious to see what they do with it, but that will be interesting. So
Yeah. Yep. And that might be another one you can get me to go and see. We'll have to wait and see on that. But no, this has been great, Nathan. Really glad that we were able to, get together and do this. We're hoping, maybe down the road we can get Greg on here and, maybe for a special, Halloween episode, we can do something a little different and talk horror in general, but we'll see what happens.
Oh yeah. And you're talking about upcoming movies, man. I'm excited for Ad Astra with Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones, sci-fi movie. That's the big one on my radar right now. It comes out in I think 2 weeks, next weekend maybe.
Yep.
And I'm pretty excited about that. It's kind of flying under the radar. I love science fiction, and I do really like that director, James Gray. He's done a lot of really good stuff. Let me throw this out there. Anyone who's interested in sort of those old style adventure movies, the Lost Tribes and that sort of thing, The Lost City of Z. Have you ever seen that movie, Nathan?
I have not. It's on Amazon Prime, isn't it?
It is a couple years old. I highly recommend it. It's on there now. Director's James Gray. He's got Ad Astra coming out in a couple weeks, and I think it's a really good movie. So
nice. I'll have to check that one out. Maybe we can go see the movie together and do another review here.
Yeah, sounds great, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Take care.
Absolutely. All right, we'll catch you later, Nathan. We just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.